Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a very special live episode of our countdown of the top 10 cases to look forward to in 2025. This is what happened. We were going to record a top 10 cases of 2025 to look forward to, like we did last week. Last Monday, we did a live premiere of the top cases of 2024. You guys all enjoyed it, and we were going to do the same thing this week, but we thought, you know what? Let's try something new. Let's try something different. Let's try something fun, and let's do it live. So here we are, giving this a shot, and I think that you all are going to enjoy it. So thank you, everybody, for being here. We moved it a little bit earlier in the evening to accommodate a certain game taking place tonight, which I stupidly forgot all about that was taking place. But the wild card game, NFC wild card game is taking place. And so we're going to try to get this done so that you guys can enjoy that. Go Rams. Sorry to all of my Minnesota folks, Kaylin included, even though she's a native Southern Californian. She's giving me the no, shaking her head no, but we Rams and Vikings this evening. But thank you guys for being here. We'll have some fun before you get to watching the game. So I'm going to go through the cases. We're going to talk a little bit about them. I'm going to give you some of my hot takes on it. I want to take your questions and comments all along the way. As always, stay tuned to the very end because we will have some announcements for you. Please hit the like button on this episode. Please subscribe if you guys haven't already. If you subscribe, then you can leave us some comments and contribute to the conversation that we're having tonight. So first of all, let's just give Lisa H4 some love for saying go Rams. Yes, thank you very much, Lisa. So before we get into all of that, though, one thing I have to address, and we've received so much concern and love and an outpouring from all of you wonderful people in this community about the incredible disaster that's taken place here in Los Angeles with the wildfires. I will tell you, I've lived in Southern California my entire life. I've never experienced something like this. This is a disaster really beyond imagination. I lived through the Northridge earthquake, thought that was probably going to be the greatest thing to hit Southern California in my lifetime. And I really feel that when the dust settles from all of this, this will be the greatest disaster that we have experienced, certainly in my lifetime. So many people, I realize, are dealing with tragedy and loss far more serious than some of the stuff we're going to talk about this evening. I thought it would be important to acknowledge that, send our prayers to all of those people experiencing that. I thank God my family is safe. My loved ones are safe, but I know many people who have lost their homes. It's absolutely, I don't know another word for it, but just heartbreaking and devastating. My brother had to evacuate his home. His home is still standing, but this is changing minute by minute. The winds are changing. He lives in an area where they are under threat, but his home is still standing. My sister, until just a few weeks ago, lived in Malibu, and the home that she lived in is burnt to the ground now. And so, by God's grace, I think they came up with the idea they needed to downsize, and they moved out of Malibu. But all of her friends and neighbors from that old neighborhood are just dealing with this devastation. So again, I really appreciate, I know a lot of you have been checking in and sending prayers and well wishes, and I appreciate all of that. But it is a absolutely history-making, life-changing moment here in Los Angeles. And we're still, even if we're not affected directly, it's hanging in the air. Literally, you wake up and smell the smoke and see the ash on the ground and realize that it's still an ongoing disaster. It's 14% contained, the Palisades fire, 14%. This is several days later. So just wanted to take a moment to do that, not to bring us all down, but let's concentrate on some things that we all love to follow and give our time and attention and hobbies to, and that is the true crime world. And 2025, I got to tell you, is going to be remarkable a year. There's a lot of stuff coming up. Some of these cases, I'm sure you guys have been following. Some of them you might not know about. The order we decided to go in is just calendar year. So this is what we expect to take place throughout the year. This is no order as far as significance or importance. It's just what we expect to take place through the year. So starting with our first case, though, not entirely fitting into that mold as far as when it will happen because no trial has been set. But when Angela Craig went on life support on March 15th, 2023 in Aurora, Colorado, police assigned a homicide detective to investigate her case even as she was still alive. 3 days later, and only hours after Angela was declared dead, her husband would be arrested and charged with her murder. Investigators would soon uncover evidence that James Craig had poisoned his wife's protein shakes with lethal doses of potassium cyanide and tetrahydrozoline, a decongestant found in over-the-counter eye drops. Since his arrest, Craig has remained busy picking up new charges for allegedly bribing a fellow inmate to plant evidence in his case and attempts to convince another inmate to murder the lead detective in his murder case. Craig will be back in court this coming Valentine's Day, February 14th, for a preliminary hearing on the new charges, with trial expected to take place later this year. So like I said, this is the first one to come up in the new year, but the trial has not been set yet. This case is fascinating to me because it's one of those things where the outside appearance of this, they had really an ideal life. This is a guy with a wife, 6 children, successful dentist, again, outside appearances. He was active in his church, but underneath, there was this incredible underbelly of a very dark side in this man. He had been apparently cheating on her more than once. So there was infidelity in the marriage. He had a porn addiction that we're now finding out about, that she had at least become aware of, his wife. He apparently had financial troubles. The business was falling apart and he was experiencing all sorts of financial stress, which may have contributed to the reasons why he was took the steps that he did, again, allegedly. And there's also evidence that he may have poisoned her in the past. There was an incident where they reference in their conversations between each other, husband and wife, where she talks about him having done this in the past. And it's unclear whether or not that was an attempt on her life or what was just an attempt to drug her. Regardless, this man has obvious problems with boundaries and what is appropriate to do to another person without their permission. And that's putting it lightly. The police investigation found out that he was also currently having an affair during this time. Now, the woman he was having an affair with was apparently unaware of any of this other stuff. His addictions, the purchasing of poisons, what he was doing with his wife. She thought, she was under the impression he was about to leave his wife. And she was just, dealing with a man who was trying to move on with his life. And of course, Google searches, police were able to uncover. Google searches such as, how many grams of pure arsenic will kill a human? It amazes me, and I'm sure it does all of you, how specific these guys get in these Google searches. It's like they don't just want to know about what are the effects of arsenic or what is arsenic. They want to know, how will it kill a human being? You imagine typing those words into a computer. Another one was, quote, is arsenic detectable in an autopsy? Something he was curious about. He read an article entitled 6 Deadly Undetectable Poisons and How to Detect Them. Whoever wrote this article, I think, is probably somebody who should be investigated. I can't believe articles like that actually exist on the internet. Quote, the top 10 deadliest plants. So he was obviously searching for whatever way that he could to try to poison this poor woman and do it in a way that was undetectable. And then there was the deliveries of poison to his office that was intercepted by one of the workers at his dental practice. The guy's just all over the map with his craziness, which again, I guess the most amazing thing about this is how a person can live a seemingly normal life. And if you guys have questions on any of these cases, by the way, or just comments, let us know, and we'll try to share as many of those as we can. But it just amazes me that a person can be living a life that many people from the outside looking in might even admire and envy. Sheila Duffy says, why can't people just get a divorce? Excellent question. We no longer live in a time where that's really an impediment to moving on with your life. And to take it upon yourself to take someone else's life, someone that you loved, someone that you built a life with, someone that's the mother of your 6 children, just blows my mind. But there is obviously something very wrong with this man, because he hasn't stopped since he's been in jail. He then tried to get another inmate to plant evidence, plant letters that apparently would look like they were from his wife, appearing as though she was suicidal, and he wanted them planted in the garage of his home for police to find during their investigation. And by the way he was going to pay for this was through dental work. The guy has no shame. And then once that was uncovered, he didn't stop there, because then he tried to hire another inmate to have the lead investigator in his case killed. This guy's an absolute menace. I mean, he is off the map evil. It's one thing for a person to feel like they're in dire straits and they can't do anything about it and to make awful, awful decisions. But I think it's another thing entirely to just turn mob boss type evil. And he really has demonstrated himself to be that way. Farm Girl says, this guy can't get out of his own way. No, to the point, excellent point, Farm Girl, to the point that his own attorneys dropped out. They said, we don't want any part of this. It looks like he may have been using his attorneys to try to communicate some of this information. This will sometimes happen. Inmates will try to pass messages through their attorneys, unknown to the attorneys. Hey, could you give this letter to a friend of mine, to my cousin? Could you pass this message along to my uncle, whatever it is? And they're passing along contraband or illegal information, and his attorneys, I'm not saying this happened here, but his attorneys said there's obviously a conflict. And I think they quite frankly took a look and said, this guy's such a mess. He's making what was already a horrible, horrible situation many, many times worse by now committing crimes since he's been in jail, and they wanted no part of it. And good for them. They pulled the ripcord and they said, we're no longer your attorneys. And he's got new attorneys who will be handling his case coming up on Valentine's Day. The irony isn't lost to me, where he's going to be having a preliminary hearing on these new charges, which I imagine will eventually become part of the overall trial as it heads to trial later this year. Donna Barnes says, Josh, how come nothing is ever said about their children? Well, I think a lot of that might be on purpose to try to spare the children from being brought into the limelight. But if your question more, Donna, is how come nobody considers their children when they're doing something about this, I agree with you. But this person is obviously, some sort of black belt level narcissist who only cares about themselves and only cared about moving on from his life and his wife and his children and moving on to some new mistress. And again, I feel bad for the mistress because it sounds like she's a victim as much as anybody else. So there's this little dopey looking guy here in the orange jumpsuit is about one of the most evil people you'll probably run across. And he's a dentist. So if you already didn't have fears of going to the dentist to begin with, now I've thrown this on your dinner table, and go ahead and enjoy that. If you want to hear a more in-depth coverage of this case, we did a case notes episode of this. I will make sure that it ends up in the description of this video. We'll try to attach that in the comments as well. But we did a really in-depth dive of this case, and there's far more than what I am just sharing with you guys now. That is case number 1. Moving on to case number 2. An Idaho woman convicted of conspiring to kill her 2 youngest children, and another woman was found competent to stand trial in Arizona for more charges of murder and attempted murder. Two court-appointed doctors deemed doomsday mom Lori Vallow fit to face charges of conspiring to kill her estranged fourth husband, Charles Vallow, and the attempted murder of her niece's ex-husband, Brandon Boudreaux. Charles was shot and killed in 2019 by Lori's late brother, Alex Cox, who told police he acted in self-defense and was never charged. Vallow has already been sentenced to life in prison in Idaho for conspiring in the deaths of her 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, and her fifth husband's late wife, Tammy Daybell. She will represent herself in Arizona when jury selection begins on March 31st. So I know that is a case that a lot of you are going to be looking forward to following. That's coming up in March. Buckle up. This one is going to be an absolute mess. Give me a moment to kind of coat my throat. That's the name of the tea I'm drinking, is throat coat. So I'm hoping that'll help out with my voice a little bit. As a prosecutor, I have had the misfortune of handling a couple of pro per cases where the defendant is representing themselves. And it's just a logistic nightmare. It just makes everything more difficult for everyone. It never benefits the defendant, but they have a right to do that. In a way, what they do is they have a right to counsel. And any right that you have, you can potentially waive. And so she has decided to go ahead and waive her right to counsel here. Jody Arrington asks, why does the justice system even entertain her crap? Great question, Jody. Better question, should they? But the answer is that you are entitled to do this. Now, there are certain hurdles that we're going to get into that you actually have to get past. But, you have a right to waive certain constitutional rights. And this does happen quite a bit. Sorry. This lingering cough. People waive their rights sometimes. They waive their right to a jury trial when they take a plea. They waive their right to confront the witnesses against them when they take a plea. So you can see many instances where somebody would waive their rights. But it turns into a circus. And we saw this most famously in the case of Darrell Brooks for the Waukesha Christmas Parade massacre. He represented himself. It turned into an absolute circus. And the judge in that case had to work overtime. And I applaud the judge in that case. I'm blanking on her name right now, but she did an excellent job of handling that. But it just added so much more trouble to the case. And I fear that's exactly what's going to be happening here. Now, added to that, she was in and out of competency in Idaho. So she's already demonstrated mental issues. So you've got a person who is mentally unstable, let's put it that way, who is also now a person who's saying they want to represent themselves. Now, just so you understand, competency is different than insanity. A person's competency is a really low standard. It's, do you understand that you're on trial for murder? Do you understand who the judge is? Do you understand who the jury is? Do you understand who your lawyer is? Do you understand who the prosecutor is? Very low standard to arrive at competency. The next standard is, can she represent herself? And again, that's not entirely a given. It's actually, the presumption is against allowing that. But as long as someone, and the words are, knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily waive their rights. And the judge in this case went through all of that, asked her questions to make sure that she knows what's going on, asked her questions to make sure that she could intelligently represent herself. It was obviously voluntarily. She'd been asking for this for some time. All of this is to make sure that if this ends up on appeal, the first question on appeal can't be she shouldn't have been allowed to represent herself. It's still going to be the first question on appeal. It's still going to be the first thing that they bring up when she gets convicted in this case, is that she shouldn't have been allowed to represent herself. But I think the judge did an admirable job of at least establishing that knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily waiving of rights. Alicia K. Mayo says, pro per, does that mean no possible appeal later? No, it means you can try and appeal anything. It's just whether or not it will be granted. And that's why I'm saying I think the judge in this case did a good job of establishing the reasons to allow her to waive her right to counsel. One more thing that is a safeguard in this case is she will have standby counsel. There will be an attorney sitting next to her, waiting in the wings, taking notes, following along, has all the benefit of the evidence as well. She is going to run the show. Lori is going to be the one in charge of how her case is handled, but we don't have that fear of her all of a sudden saying, I don't know what I'm doing here. I never should have been allowed to represent myself. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how the system works. I'm being outgunned by the prosecutor. None of these evidence rules make sense to me. Oh, I guess it does make sense that you go to law school. I guess there is something, behind passing the bar. They can just put standing counsel right in. And that might even happen if she turns this thing into a mess anyways. If she just decides to use all of her cross-examination to proselytize and give her, religious sermons, and it's really not effective or even meaningful cross-examination. But end of the day, you are allowed to represent yourself. And even if representing yourself means behaving bizarrely or behaving like a crazy person. And I don't mean to be dismissive, and I don't mean to be name calling, but there's no law against having fringe religious beliefs. There's no law against believing that the taking of lives is somehow towards the greater good of humanity. If that's her defense, then that's her defense. And she has a right in this country to say that that's her defense. Now, she's going to go down in flames for it, but that's what she's entitled to do. And I think it's just up to a judge to make sure that it doesn't turn into much of a sideshow while this is going on, because this is still very, very serious stuff we're talking about. Lisa H4 says, can the actual lawyer step in or guide her when she's making mistakes, or only step in when asked? Really good question, Lisa. The answer is the standby is not a crutch. The standby is not, checking in with that person. The standby is simply there to be an impartial person to step in if there's a problem, so that we don't have to declare a mistrial and start this thing all over again. That being said, in practice, many times the judge takes a break. For whatever reason, there's an opportunity where the defendant and standby counsel might confer, but that becomes really problematic. And standby counsel is instructed not to strategically advise. But if it's simply a matter of how do I mark an exhibit, or who goes first in voir dire, those questions are usually seen as not somehow interjecting into the advocating process, and they're allowed to do that. But it's, again, touchy ground. Excellent question, because you can imagine standby counsel's no fun job either. You got to sit there and watch this whole, dumpster fire taking place, and not do anything about it, realizing that this person's just not doing themselves any favors. Again, continue to remind yourselves, they're allowed to do it. They have a right to do this. They have a right to put on as ridiculous a defense as they want to, as long as they're not doing anything illegal or against the rules of evidence. So that's going to be a hell of a ride for next year as well. Now, that brings us to number 3. The case of a woman accused of striking her Boston police officer boyfriend with her SUV and leaving him for dead in a snowbank was one of the most highly publicized trials of 2024. Yet after 5 days of deliberations, jurors indicated they were hopelessly deadlocked and a mistrial was declared on July 1st of 2024, setting the stage for the rematch scheduled later this year in the murder trial of Karen Reed. Both sides have wasted no time jockeying for position as they hash out the rules of engagement for the coming retrial. The Commonwealth, now led by Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan, has already challenged many of the pillars of the defense case from the first trial, including a dog bite expert, accident reconstruction, and cell phone data extraction. Karen Reed's defense, led by attorneys Alan Jackson and David Yannetti, will square off with the prosecution beginning on April 1st, 2025. Believe me, it hasn't been lost on me that is April Fool's Day. All right. What is happening here? This, in my view, is not going to be a rerun of the first trial at all. And that is mainly because of Hank Brennan. Hank Brennan has come in guns a-blazing, and he is really decided to challenge everything from the first trial that the defense tried to put on. He is challenging the cell phone extraction, the experts presented by the, pardon me, guys, the experts presented by the defense on the cell phone extraction when it comes down to when that Google search, how long to die in the snow, was made. He has challenged the dog bite expert. Actually, interestingly, today, the judge ruled that the doctor called by Marie Russell, called by the defense, will be allowed to testify. And that's not a shock to me. I thought she was qualified. I think she can give that opinion. This will likely become a battle of experts in many respects, but I'll tell you in a second why I think there was a strategic reason why behind Brennan did that anyways. And he's challenging the accident reconstruction. Much of why he's doing this, I don't believe is because he actually thinks he's going to keep this stuff out. I think a lot of it has to do with nailing down these experts to what they are going to testify to. They've already testified, many of them, in the first trial. I think he was unsatisfied with the cross-examine done by Lally, and a lot of you might agree with that. I'm not trying to throw Lally under the bus here, but I don't think he was the most remarkable of advocates for the Commonwealth. And I think he left a lot on the table, a lot of meat on the bones, as it were. And I think Brennan has decided, okay, if we're doing this again, I'm gonna hear exactly what these people intend to testify to. And I think that Cannoni, the judge, will allow many of these people to testify again, because the standard for allowing an expert to testify is not all that outrageous. It's, is this helpful to the jury? Does the jury need an expert on this? You don't need an expert on jaywalking to understand if somebody was jaywalking, but you might need an expert on dog bites. You might need an expert to understand data extraction from a cell phone. You might need an expert to understand accident reconstruction of a vehicle impact. Those are things that are important and where expert testimony can enlighten the jury. And then the person testifying has to actually qualify as an expert themselves. And I think that they have met both of those prongs. Dr. Russell was eminently qualified as having seen many dog bites as a treating physician, seen many vehicle strikes as a treating physician. And if she has the opinion that this was a dog bite, then that's her opinion. And that's just what the defense is absolutely going to argue to their benefit, and what the prosecution is going to have to somehow combat with their own experts, I imagine. But I think Brennan knew that going in, and he just wants to see, where exactly is she basing that on? Why exactly is she saying that? Because I imagine he's got experts in the wings waiting to attack that. Simi Sharp says, or asked, pardon me, is the defense objecting to the Commonwealth's experts as well? I have not seen them lodge any objections on that. It seems like a lot of the litigation in pretrial has been taking place from the prosecution side of things, which you don't usually see. Usually in a retrial, pardon me, it's the prosecution just kind of putting on their same case again. Maybe they might simplify their case. Maybe they might, which I think they should have done here. Maybe they might remove some charges, which I think they should have done here. But for the defense to really, or pardon me, for the Commonwealth, the prosecution to really want to resculpt the landscape going into a retrial is not something that you often see. And that brings me to, one last thing that Brennan is doing is he is making great efforts to try to get Karen Read's statements that she made to the media into this trial. My friend, my colleague, Alan Jackson, I've known him for a long time. I can't imagine he signed off on or was very pleased with the idea that she gave a bunch of interviews about this case before it headed to trial. That is like defense attorney 101. Keep your client quiet. I don't care your PR people, what they're telling you. I don't care what the public persona, Twitter sphere, whatever else is going on. Keep your mouth shut before you go to trial because of a situation like this, where the prosecution is now going to try to get those unredacted tapes and whatever notes were taken. And I don't know if there's anything in there or not. She made a statement, Karen Read did, of saying, what do you guys think? There's a confession in there that hasn't been turned over by the media? She makes an excellent point. You know, after all this period of time, do you really think that one of these media outlets is sitting on a confession they haven't turned over? It may not be a confession, though. It may just be some element, some aspect that the Commonwealth wants to use against her that they didn't have ahead of time. And I think that, again, goes back to Lally's handling of this case the first time around, is he just kind of allowed the defense to do what they were going to do, and he seemed almost unconcerned with what the defense was doing. And I don't know if that's because he had so much confidence in his case or was just getting outgunned. Alicia K. Mayo asks, juries may vote one way or another on likability of the accused. What's your estimate on jury voting on one or other based on likability of the attorneys? That's a great question, too. They do judge the attorneys. Now, you would hope that they would judge the defendant on the evidence regardless of the attorneys, but people are people. They don't stop being people just because they've become jurors. And if they don't like someone, they're probably going to allow their own confirmation bias to mean they're not going to like that person's arguments and they're not going to like that person's client. That works both ways, Commonwealth or defense. If people don't like this guy, Brennan, they don't like how he's treating the experts in this case, they don't like his aggressiveness, they could hold that against the Commonwealth as well. So I think part of being a good advocate, part of being a good trial attorney is reading the room, just being likable, just being believable. One of the best prosecutors I ever saw in my entire life, if you were to watch this guy, his name was John Monahan. You probably never heard of him. At one point, though, John Monahan held the distinction, if you want to call it, of having more people on death row in California than any other prosecutor. And why this guy was so good, if you were to watch him in court, there wasn't something fabulous about the way that he conducted himself. He wasn't polished. He wasn't Alan Jackson. He wasn't Yannetti. He didn't have this kind of, slick, and I don't mean that derisively. He didn't have this kind of polish about him. He was just straightforward. These are the facts. And he didn't mess around. And I'm telling you, at the end of that, those jurors believed they could take everything that he said to the bank because he was believable and he was trustworthy. And that's probably one of the most important aspects for an attorney to have on both sides, quite frankly. I know defense attorneys are supposed to be a little bit of razzle dazzle. But if you're not believable to the jury, they're not going to believe your arguments as well. So I think that ability to turn your questions into testimony because you're so believable that when you start asking questions, the jurors are paying more attention to those questions than the answers because they believe you. That's a very powerful tool to have as a prosecutor. Last point on this is that will these guys pivot, both sides? You remember that the first trial ended in a hung jury, in a deadlock jury. And then we had all of this idea that they'd actually acquitted Karen Read of the more serious charge. And there's a couple of ways to look at that. First of all, I think the prosecution can look at that and go, listen, we've done this. We've done a trial run. We've done a mock jury, essentially. And we had 12 people tell us they don't believe that she had the intent necessary for a second-degree murder of John O'Keefe. I think the smart idea would be for them to dismiss that moving forward. I think they're overextending themselves and overextending their arguments to try to say she meant to do this. But the defense also has something they may be able to learn from that. And that is that at least some of those jurors believe that she was somehow involved in this accident. Now, I know a lot of you guys feel very strongly about this case. I'm just saying I'm going to look at this from what are the jurors telling me. And those jurors from the first trial, if they are to be believed, some of them at least did not buy the cover-up. Some of them did not believe that she was being framed. Can the defense learn something from that? Can the defense perhaps lean in a little bit more to the idea of intent? Or is this a zero-sum game and there's no going back and they have to go with this cover-up theory? Again, I think the defense did an admirable job the first time around. They took a case that I think in the hands of lesser attorneys probably would have ended up in a conviction. And they turned that into a deadlock jury. And maybe they think you don't mess with magic the first time around. And maybe that's what they're going to do the second time around. But it will be interesting to me to see if both sides pivot a little bit in their strategies. The Commonwealth certainly seems that they have. We'll see if we get the same out of the defense. All right, moving on. Number 4, a Utah mother of 3 who published a children's book about grief after her husband's death was later accused of fatally poisoning him will stand trial in April of this year. Kouri Richins faces a litany of felony charges for allegedly killing her husband with a lethal dose of fentanyl in March of 2022 at their home in a small mountain town near Park City. Prosecutors say Kouri slipped 5 times the lethal dose of synthetic opioid into a Moscow Mule cocktail that she served to Eric Richins. In the month before her arrest in May of 2023, the Utah mother self-published the children's book, Are You With Me?, about a father with angel wings watching over his young sons after passing away. The book could eventually play a key role for prosecutors in framing Eric Richins' death as a calculated killing with an elaborate cover-up attempt. The trial is expected to begin on April 28th of 2025. All right, what is happening here? This is one of the cases that I'm kind of looking forward to, and I'm curious how you guys feel about this case. Sometimes I see a lot of interest in it from you all, and then sometimes not so much. But to me, it's got kind of all of those elements that I find very intriguing because it's going to be heavy on motive, heavy on circumstantial evidence, heavy on the things that are hard for a prosecutor to prove. There's very little kind of direct forensic evidence here. There's no eyewitnesses to the crime. There's no DNA linking this case together. This is all about piecing together 1,000 cuts and, death by 1,000 cuts, piecing together evidence, creating enough so that you get past that burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. And with those cases, with a motive heavy case, it's important to talk about, first of all, motive is not something that prosecutors ever have to prove. When I was a prosecutor, constantly voir dire on this to jurors. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to prove to you a lot of things. I intend to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt all of the elements of this crime. But one thing you may be surprised to know I don't have to prove to you is motive, is the why. I'm going to tell you the what, I'm going to tell you the how, I'm going to tell you the who. But the most important question you may have in your minds is the why, and that's something I don't have to prove to you. Are you okay with that? And you get a lot of people who say, no, I'm not okay with that. And you get an opportunity to kind of discuss that in the jury selection process and get people comfortable with the idea that motive is not required. Now, that all being said, when I actually put on the trial, you can be sure I would give them motive. I would give them some understanding as to why this took place, because that is just kind of the most important question that we all have. Motive is different than intent. Intent is I meant to do something. I meant to pull the trigger. I meant to kill that person. Motive is, why did I want that person dead? And that is something that we don't put on prosecutors to prove. We don't expect them to understand the machinations that take place inside of somebody's mind as to why they might do something. But in a case like this, when you're talking about the taking of a loved one, it's so important to do. It's so important to let them have at least some reason that the jurors can hang their hats on so they can understand, why did this take place? So what is the evidence of motive in this case? First of all, we know she had money problems. She'd apparently embezzled money from her husband in the past. They both owned different businesses. Tayo Toy says, I want to hear all the forensic accounting. I'm sure that's going to play a large role in this case. She was experiencing financial stress, is probably the best way to put it. There's also evidence of a possible affair that she was having. Again, just kind of building in jurors' minds, why would somebody do this? Why would you take your husband's life, the father of your children's life? Then there's also evidence that she may have purchased these drugs from a housekeeper. If some of that gets in, if some of that testimony gets in, very strong case for the prosecution. How they get that in may be a different story, may be more difficult. And then finally, what do we got? No surprise to anybody, we've got Google searches. Here's some of the highlights. Quote, can cops uncover deleted messages on an iPhone? Quote, what are you allowed inside Utah jails? I love that one because it's like, kind of knows she's going down and is already curious as to what life is going to be like. Quote, what is considered a lethal dose of fentanyl? Again, it blows my mind the amount of planning that these people will put in to murdering someone and still just ask such an abundantly straightforward question on Google. It's like, why didn't she just say, what is the best way to kill my husband, Eric? It's like so abundantly clear as to what she was searching for online. And then we have her behavior after the murder. We know that there was this altercation that took place between Kouri and her sister-in-law regarding a safe, kind of a bunch of kind of consciousness of guilt. She was after the money. Almost immediately after this, he was dead. And then finally, this infamous walk the dog letter. And this was a letter that the story goes, she wrote a letter, and it's unclear. I think that she never actually gave it to her mother. I think the intent was she was going to hold it up for her mother to read through the glass during a visit. And to disguise it, she put in big bold letters at the top, walk the dog. And as if someone observing would see that this only appears to be instructions that she's giving to her mother about the care of her house and the care of the dog. But instead, inside of it was a bunch of instructions of how she wanted other family members to testify at her preliminary hearing and at her trial. So again, it's another one of those cases where it looks like a large part of her undoing may come from the behavior that she had before or afterwards in the cover-up than it will be, the evidence linking her to the crime ahead of time. Case I'm looking forward to, and I don't mean to make these things sound so much like entertainment, but it's a case I'm really interested to see how the prosecution will piece together. And it's another case that if you guys are interested on, we did a real deep dive on this case in another one of our case notes series. Very proud of the work that we put into this. A lot of research. If you're interested, again, check it out. It'll be in the description, and we will make sure that you guys have a link. All right. That brings us to number 5. In March of 2024, the homes of hip-hop mogul Sean Diddy Combs were raided by Homeland Security in Florida and Los Angeles. This came on the heels of a lawsuit filed by Cassie Ventura, Combs' longtime romantic partner, alleging acts of domestic violence and sexual assault. The lawsuit was ended in a confidential settlement the following day. Later last year, on September 16th of 2024, Combs is arrested at a luxury Manhattan hotel based upon a federal grand jury indictment. The unsealed indictment alleges that Combs and others he associated with were members of a criminal organization that engaged in several illegal activities, including sex trafficking, forced labor, prostitution-related transportation, and coercion, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Combs is accused of leading the criminal operations, and the indictment says those who worked for him, including security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and high-ranking supervisors, were all part of a criminal enterprise, either knowingly or unknowingly. Since that time, Combs has made 3 failed attempts to secure his freedom pending trial, expected to begin on May 5th. All right. Here's my thoughts on this. The feds don't mess around. If you ever hear about somebody being federally indicted, I just want you to appreciate the amount of work that went into that. Okay? The feds don't sneeze without a memo. Everything they do is run up the chain of command and back down the chain of command. Everything that they do has unlimited resources nearly. They've got a team of special agents assigned to a case. When I was in the DA's office, we would oftentimes get federal rejects, meaning a case that had been worked up by special agents, by FBI, by some other agency, DEA, what have you, and they didn't want to deal with it. They rejected it. It wasn't good enough for them. We would get these cases and just be beside ourselves by how good they were, how well they were worked up, how many research. I'm talking wiretaps. I'm talking bank records. I'm talking all sorts of stuff that we never would have access to on the state level. They had all done on the federal level, and still, even then, it wasn't good enough for them. You get indicted by the feds, you can be sure they did their homework. They don't like losing. They don't like bringing big charges against big celebrities and ending up with egg on their face. They have put the work in on this case. That is bad news, to put it lightly, for Sean Diddy Combs. The other thing about this is one of the things that the feds love to do is they love to use people against defendants. This is the United States versus Sean Diddy Combs. One defendant. This indictment outlines a criminal enterprise with all sorts of people involved in helping him execute these crimes. Where are they? Why isn't it the U.S. versus Sean Diddy Combs and James, John, Lisa Allen, the whole list of other people who were all his associates, co-workers, security guards, assistants, and everybody else. Because the feds cast a wide net and then they slowly close it in. And I'm sure that they have talked to all those people, and all those people have had a conversation very similar to this. You have a choice. You can either be with us or be against us. Which side of the US V do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the US side or the Sean Diddy Combs side? Do you want to get on the bus that heads to the witness line, or do you want to get on the bus that heads to the defendant line? And every one of these people, I'm telling you, there's no love lost for this man at this point. Every one of those people have been willing to testify against him and have cooperated and have flipped on him. And that's why it's still the US versus Diddy. Now, that may change. There's still an ongoing grand jury. There's still investigation. There's still names popping up. JC Broadway asks, you think this trial will happen this year? I do. I think that there's no reason to prolong this. Now, his attorneys are probably, going to kick and scream every step of the way. But I imagine sometime this year, we are going to see this end up in trial. It's set for trial right now. Like I said, coming up in, what did I tell you guys? Coming up on May 5th. So we may be seeing this come to trial this year. I would not be shocked by that at all. And we may see other people swept up in it. There are lots of celebrities' names who've been bandied about. Lots of, we've already heard Jay-Z get sued. So it may end up being more people involved in this case. But right now, a lot of people have had some real serious conversations with their attorneys, and they've decided to cooperate with the federal government. And that's made the case against Diddy even stronger and stronger. Shy Gal 8 asks, Josh, do you think this all started with Cassie? Well, the timing of it seems to indicate that, right? For a long time, people may have known what he was up to, but it wasn't until she filed that lawsuit, and not just filed it, because I guarantee you there was negotiations taking place between her people and his people before they went public. They went public, and he immediately settles with her the next day in an undisclosed amount. He wanted that shut down super quick. And I wonder if that was just enough of a glimpse for the feds to say, okay, there's something here and we need to get involved. And maybe her willingness to come forward caused other people to come forward. I think, we're seeing kind of a cultural shift. I think that the takedown of Diddy has made a lot of people have the courage to come forward about things that have been done to them by very powerful people. And there's no protection anymore. If Diddy can fall, anybody can fall. We saw round one of that with Harvey Weinstein, and I think this is kind of the second wave. Any chance of a plea? I don't think so, because I don't think they're going to offer him anything that gets him out of prison while he's still breathing air. I think this thing heads to trial. I think he realizes that the only thing he's got is to just try to fight this thing tooth and nail, and good luck, because like I said, the feds don't mess around. Jody Arrington asks, does she still receive the settlement in lieu of the fact that all his assets and bank accounts have been seized? Sure. She's still got a settlement she can enforce. She'll enforce that against his estate. She'll make sure that if she probably got paid out already, though. I imagine part of that settlement was, we're not dropping this lawsuit until that check clears. And so I imagine she got that money already. All right. Let me just give myself some more of this tea. I apologize, you guys, for my voice. My voice was doing good today, and it's starting to give up on me again. But one quick thing I wanted to talk to you guys about before we get into the next 5 cases to round out the year is go to thecourtroomconfidential.com and leave us a voice message, please. If you click on this button here, it brings up this prompt. It's really easy to do. And we're trying to do this really fun thing on Sundays. Our next Sunday Fun Day is coming up this Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. And we're going to be playing these voice messages. I would love to hear from you guys. Ask us a question, leave us a comment. Thank you so much, Shy Gal, for the memberships. Participate in this whole fun experiment. We had a lot of fun doing it last Sunday, but we need to get some more comments out of you folks. So take a moment, do it. It was a blast doing it last time, and I would love for it to become kind of a regular part of these Sunday shows. Annalie, yes, thank you for the contribution towards my honey fund. I will definitely be using it. Believe me, I've been going through the honey. I think it's a combination of the cold that I had, and then the smoke in the air is certainly not helping. But Annalie, tell me all about it when you leave me a voice message. Everybody who's got any other tips on helping my voice out, leave me a voice message about it. We would love to hear from all of you. We had a lot of fun doing it last time. All right. Moving on. Number 6. The matriarch of a South Florida family who made their fortune practicing dentistry was arrested in 2023 at the Miami International Airport on charges of orchestrating the hitman murder of her ex-son-in-law 1 week after her oral surgeon son was convicted on the same first-degree murder charge. Authorities charged Donna Adelson with arranging the 2014 murder of Florida State University law professor Daniel Markel, who was shot in the head inside his Tallahassee garage. Charlie Adelson was convicted in 2023 of arranging Markel's shooting through a girlfriend, Katie Magbanwa. She employed her ex-boyfriend and his friend, the latter a member of the notorious Latin Kings gang, to murder Markel. Magbanwa and her boyfriend, Sigfredo Garcia, are serving life sentences after being convicted earlier of first-degree murder. His friend, Luis Rivera, is serving a 19-year sentence after pleading guilty to second-degree murder and testifying against the others. Donna Adelson's new attorneys, Jackie Fulford and Josh Zellman, have replaced her former legal team, which was abruptly forced to resign in September of 2024. Donna was previously represented by Daniel Rashbaum, who had also represented Charlie at his murder trial. On the eve of trial, Rashbaum withdrew from the case, citing conflict of interest, and his co-counsel was dismissed for the same reasons. Judge Stephen Everett has set June 16th as the start date for Donna's trial. This is a case I know that a lot of you have been following for a long time. It's a case that's been going on for an incredibly long time, and this might be the final chapter. You know, there's one other individual out there that everybody always asks about, Wendy. When is Wendy getting her comeuppance? But this may be the final chapter in this entire thing. Lisa H4 says, this is the one I'm waiting for, Wendy next. We'll see. Maybe 2026, I'll be talking about Wendy's trial coming up. But this, to me, in all of the cases that has been handled by this prosecution team in regard to Dan Markel's murder, and they've done an excellent job. This, to me, is by the way, if you haven't checked out these tumblers that we have, they're fantastic. This, to me, will be probably the greatest test for the prosecution to date. Not saying it's a weak case, not saying they won't be able to bring it home. I'm just saying it's going to be the greatest test thus far of the cases they've handled. And that really has to do, I think, more than anything, with just degrees of separation. They have to draw a line. They have to connect the dots. They have to take out their corkboard with all their push pins and their yarn in between, and they have to connect the dots from Donna to Charlie to Catherine Magbanwa to Sigfredo Garcia, and then back again. This is in many ways like a mob boss case. The reason why it was so difficult to take down mob bosses for so many years, and part of the reason why they came up with RICO, is because of these degrees of separation insulating the mob boss, okay? Insulating the godfather from all of the work of the trigger men. Because how are you going to connect all those dots? Now, you may say, well, a lot of this just makes sense. Why on earth would Charlie be doing this if it wasn't for Donna's involvement? And why on earth would Donna know about certain things if it wasn't for Charlie's involvement? And all of that other kind of stuff. And I get it and I understand. But remember, the standard that we have here is beyond a reasonable doubt. And every time you make one further step away from Sigfredo, from the trigger man, it's going to get that much more difficult. Again, not impossible, but just that much more difficult. The other thing that you have to bear in mind is that the jurors in this new trial are not the same jurors from the previous trials. They're going to have to learn all of this all over again. They're going to have to learn everything that we already know about Charlie's involvement and everything that we already know about Catherine McBanois and Sigfredo Garcia. And they put on marvelous trials with those prior prosecutions. But again, they're going to have to go through proving all of this to this jury, several more steps, one more degree of separation until they're able to get to Donna. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it's just more complicated. And you then have to prove, after all of these connections, that Donna knew about it ahead of time. Because proving she may have knowledge of it after the fact is one thing, but that's not what they're putting her on trial for. They're putting her on trial for being a part of the ordering of it, of the planning of it, of the orchestration of it. They're going to have to get past, they're going to have to prove she knew about it ahead of time. She participated in it. And that there wasn't this, argument of extortion taking place afterwards. And again, I can hear all of you saying, Ritter, you got it all backwards. You don't understand the strength of the case. I understand the strength of the case. I'm just saying, don't put this in the slam dunk column just yet. It's going to be a fascinating trial, a trial that I expect to follow very closely on this channel. And I'm sure you guys all will as well. Jody Arrington says, do you think Rashbaum is going to face trouble with the Florida bar? Charlie just filed an appeal, and we talked about this a little bit on our Friday show. And part of his appeal was that because Rashbaum was representing Donna at the same time he was representing Charlie, that's not a problem just by itself. But if he made strategic decisions, Rashbaum made strategic decisions during Charlie's case to protect Donna, and those decisions could have had even a minimal effect on Charlie's representation, then Jody, yes, I think he does have a problem. Because a attorney is supposed to zealously represent his client without bias towards anything else. So if there is even, and they're going to have to show something, they're going to have to actually show bias. It's just not suspicion or speculation. But if there is a strategic decision that he made that can be interpreted as having even a minimal effect on Charlie's representation, I think that's a clear conflict. And I think that not only will Charlie have a perhaps real chance on appeal, I imagine judges will find a way around that, but he would have a sound argument on appeal, but then Rashbaum may actually have some problems with the bar. Now, whether or not he did that is going to be another thing, because that to me is beyond the pale for an attorney. Listen, again, I'll say this. Representing multiple family members is not unheard of. I can understand the entire family came in. He's like, I'm putting all you people under retainer. You all need representation. All of that is fine. But when these conflicts start to arise, you got to get other attorneys involved. And if he didn't get other attorneys involved and started making decisions detrimental to one client to help out another client, then we're talking real, real bad news. Sorry, I just missed Pammy's. What was Pammy's question? Oh, sorry, Pammy. Oh, here we go. Pammy says, in your opinion, do you think that's what happened regarding strategy in Charlie's trial? I don't know. The one thing that I know has been highlighted is that she was on the witness list and then removed from the witness list. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know enough about the reasons for that he's provided, or the reasons at the time that were provided. That on its face, I don't think is enough. But, at least we're seeing some indication of what that could have been. Sorry, Kaylin. And then somebody else had a question. Crystal DeSaro asks, I thought his appeal was denied. Am I wrong? No, you're not wrong. What was denied was he first asked to have it sent back to the trial court level to have that question answered. That was denied. The appeal is still ongoing, but it will take place at the appellate court level. Why was it being asked to be sent down to the trial court level to handle this? I don't know. I think that might have been a checking of boxes and just making sure that they're covering all their bases, and there can't be some sort of procedural reason why it would have been denied his appeal. But that's the only thing that was denied, is he wasn't allowed to then have it heard on the trial court level, but they will still pursue this beyond that. All right. Okay. Moving on to big number 7. The death penalty will remain a possibility for a man charged with murders that shocked the nation in the stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students. Brian Kohberger is accused of the November 13th, 2022 killings of Ethan Chapin, Zaina Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez. Investigators said they have linked Kohberger, then a graduate student at nearby Washington State University, to the crime from DNA found on a knife sheath at the scene, surveillance videos, and cell phone data. Kohberger, then a graduate student at nearby Washington State University, was arrested at the end of December 2023 at his family's home in Pennsylvania. Investigators used familial DNA to link Kohberger to a DNA find at the crime scene, along with surveillance videos and cell phone data. Investigators say his cell phone pinged near the home multiple times leading up to the deaths and on the night the 4 students were killed. Kohberger's attorneys have said that he had no connection to the victims, was out for a drive watching the moon and the stars the night of the killings. Trial is scheduled to begin August 11th and is expected to last up to 3 months. All right. This is another one that I am really interested in following this coming year, mainly just because of the absolute nightmare fuel that it is. I remember it was so incredible to me that it was one of those cases where you kind of remember the moment that you heard about it. And I remember hearing about 4 college students in one house all being stabbed to death in the middle of the night. And you just went, what is going on? And then it's, in Idaho, and kind of this smaller college community, no immediate suspect identified. It was just one of those cases. And, not just me, entire true crime and media world just lost their heads, and it got a lot of attention. And I'm fascinated to see this through. And I know a lot of you are. And this is, I think, will be another case that we plan on giving some extra attention to this coming year. And so I would like to hear from you all how much you are interested in following it, because I think we're trying to put some special plans together about our coverage of this case in particular. But one thing we have seen, Shy Gal out says this crime is just unthinkable. I can't even imagine what the jury will have to see. Yeah, really, really good point. This is going to be some incredibly graphic evidence that they're going to see. I mean, stabbing murders are horrific. Multiple bodies. Yeah, just really, really difficult stuff for jurors to sit through. Tisu says the house is gone now. Yes, that is true. Another weird decision that was made. I understand that the house sits in a position that it's viewable from the campus, and the campus kind of wanted to start to try to heal and put this behind them. But from an evidentiary perspective, I think that was a really bad mistake to do before the trial was even heard. I hope that doesn't present any problems. But the defense in this case has been incredibly aggressive. CJ says, will there be cameras? I think the judge has ordered that there. I'm not sure on that, CJ. I know that that's been discussed. I don't know if this brand new judge has made a ruling on that yet. I know there have been cameras so far, and I think that what they've decided is there's going to be a pool camera and maybe just one camera, but there will be special instructions on how much that camera can focus on him or not. But I'm fairly confident that this will be, and I'm seeing some of the comments are saying that yes, this will be a case that will be covered with cameras, and I hope that it is, because it's a case of such significance and importance and intrigue to a lot of people. Shagao asks, Josh, do you think they will call the roommate to the stand? 100% they will. This is the roommate who is an eyewitness to what took place. Not an eyewitness to the murders, but an eyewitness to a person who is masked, wearing all black, matching at least the height and build and eyebrows of Kohberger, who was leaving the house at the time. The defense in this case has been incredibly aggressive. They're filing every motion that you could possibly think of, challenging every single thing. Okay, they're going ahead and doing their job. I think what a lot of this is coming down to, though, is they are really making efforts to try to get the death penalty off the table. You sometimes see this in cases where the evidence itself might be so strong that the lawyers involved view their only job as really trying to, quote unquote, save the life of their client. And I think that might be what's happening here. I think that they can see the evidence. They understand the strength of the evidence. They understand the outcry from the community. They probably do not have aspirations of walking this man out a free man. And so they're doing their level best to try to just get the death penalty as not an option in this case. Putting aside your thoughts on the death penalty, a lot of people are just morally opposed to it, ethically have troubles with it. If the death penalty is going to be on the books, this is exactly the case it's reserved for. Multiple murders, completely innocent victims, savagery involved in the killings. It's everything put together. When you try to distinguish a first-degree murder from a capital first-degree murder, this has all of those aggravating circumstances that you would expect for them to seek the death penalty. I think it will remain on the table. I think they will go to trial with the death penalty on the table, and I think that they will have a very strong argument for the death penalty. JC Broadway asks, so is his defense that he didn't do it, or that he did it for some mitigating factor he shouldn't get the death penalty? No, his defense is he didn't do it. They're going to go with the defense it wasn't him. But I imagine what you will see is some sort of strategy where they will either use a different set of attorneys to argue the penalty phase, so that the guilt phase attorneys can go all out trying to fight his guilt. And then you have different attorneys get up who've preserved their goodwill with the jurors to try to argue as to whatever mitigating factors, his upbringing, his mental health, whatever else, to spare his life. Or you will see the defense not be as aggressive during trial, where they're trying to preserve their integrity. They're trying to preserve some credit with the jurors and not go so all out. Not that they're not going to defend him, but they're not going to be outrageous in their defense of him, to perhaps have some integrity, stand in front of those same jurors during the penalty phase and say, please spare this man's life. Here is the evidence, just in a nutshell version. Pammy, thank you so much. Pammy says, warm salt gargle. I actually did try that. It is helpful. I'm still not going to give a voicemail. Pammy, give me a voicemail. Thank you so much. Joy, thank you again. So glad I found your channel. Interview with Runkle. Oh, thank you. I'm glad that you found it as well, Joy. Appreciate you being here. All right. There is cell phone data. They can track where he was. They can track that he turned off his phone during the times of the murders. There are car surveillance data, a vehicle matching his vehicle, a car matching his vehicle was seen in that area around that time. There's social media evidence. There was some sort of idea that he may have been kind of cyber stalking some of these victims. There was the eyewitness that was mentioned earlier who sees a person matching his description, at least from build and height, who left during that time. All of this, though, is window dressing. All of this is circumstantial. All of this doesn't get us to a guilty verdict. This case comes down to one piece of evidence, and that is the DNA on the knife sheath. And so I think in typical DNA cases like this, what you're going to see is them attack that on three different fronts. They're going to attack the collection of it. They're going to say it was sloppy. They contaminated things. There was cross-contamination, all sorts of transfer of DNA. DNA will become the most sticky thing you've ever heard of during the defense handling of this case. It's like if I, the concept that somehow you shake hands with someone 2 weeks ago and you're still transferring their DNA to somebody else. That's going to all become a part of this. The preservation and storage of DNA. They're going to talk about maybe even after they collected it, they still cannot be trusted for the way that it was stored. And their findings, that the DNA match was a problem. The findings part, we're living in an age where people don't really buy into that anymore. We're way past the time where people even, may have been suspicious about the findings of a DNA test. This, I think, will come down to this idea that somehow there was a contamination in the collection of this DNA. I also think that you will see some attack, and that's already happened, and I think they're gearing up for it, in the collection or the warrants that were involved in the collection of the familial DNA and how they actually matched this to his parents, because that's how they tracked him down, was the DNA to a relative. Then they were able to say that this is our suspect. If they can't get rid of any of that, they can't get rid of those warrants, they can't get rid of that familial DNA, they can't get past the collection, preservation, and findings, case over, as far as I'm concerned. It's a rock solid case. You put that DNA squarely in the middle of it, and you pretty it all up with all the other circumstantial evidence. It's a very convincing case. Lisa H4 asks, if they don't convict of death, can they convict for something less? What it'll come down to is they'll convict him. If they convict him of first-degree murder, 4 first-degree murders, they would be given the options, the jurors, of life without parole or the death penalty. And if they cannot unanimously decide on the death penalty, and fact check me on this, guys, I think Idaho is still a unanimous death penalty jurisdiction. If they cannot they changed it in Florida, but if they cannot unanimously decide on the death penalty, it defaults to life without parole. So that's the answer, is that he would get life without parole. Last thing on this case is they estimate it will take 3 months. That seems like a long time to me. I know that it's a big case, but we're really talking about one evening, one incident, 4 murders, yes, but one incident, one evening. I don't know what all can take place in that 3 months. But we'll see. Julie No Ease, thank you so much, says whiskey and honey shots, no voicemail. Julie, you're killing me. But thank you for the advice. I will give that a try. Tracy says you need to talk to Andrea about that. Andrea Burkhardt, I know, has been covering this case. I'm not quite sure what she said about Kohberger. I'm guessing it has to do with transferred DNA. Like I said, just buckle up. DNA is going to become, stickier than super glue when it comes down to the defense presentation of this case. And Shy Gal's putting together a T fund. I appreciate that, Shy Gal. CJ says also contributing to the T fund. You guys are very, very sweet. I appreciate that. All right. Moving on. Number 8. The ex-wife of a Microsoft executive who was gunned down by a triggerman in front of his young daughter has been charged with first-degree murder, and prosecutors in Florida plan to seek the death penalty. Shanna Lee Gardner, along with her estranged husband, Mario Fernandez Saldana, stand accused of orchestrating the ambush-style death of Jared Bredigan, February 16th, 2022, as he was leaving a Jacksonville Beach neighborhood after dropping off twin children he shared with Gardner and returning to his home in nearby St. Augustine. Before the indictments of Gardner and Saldana, the alleged triggerman, Henry Tenon, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He has agreed to testify against Fernandez, Saldana, and Gardner. Jury selection is expected to be scheduled for October 20th of 2025. Another fascinating case because it involves this elaborate ambush setup killing. I mean, we're not, Shanna was not going to be satisfied with just dosing his Moscow mule. She was not going to be satisfied with just cutting his brake lines. They set up this elaborate ambush where they knew where he was going to be driving. They put a tire in the road so that his vehicle had to stop. He was gunned down as he got out of the vehicle. His daughter was still inside the car. I think it was a 4-year-old. This breaks my heart. The daughter had to witness this and said something to the effect of, daddy's hurt or daddy's sick. I mean, it just breaks my heart to hear what they put this poor child through. Just another one of these cases where, again, somebody asked earlier, why not get a divorce? What are we doing here? Why are we causing this kind of harm to our loved ones and our family? And even if you don't care about this person and their life anymore, why cause such devastation to everyone else? Pamela H says, please cover this case. I used to be a Stampin' Up demonstrator. Okay, so the reason why, Pamela, thank you for that, brings that up is that Shanna is the heiress to the Stampin' Up fortune, which is I guess it's like a crafts company or something like that. Anyhow, they're well funded. But this is going to be another case high on motive. Apparently, they had a troubled marriage. They had to move around the country because their son was experiencing some medical issues. She didn't want to live in Florida. There was infidelity. They were going through this really awful, ugly divorce. And of course, it comes down to a case where they put together some text messages. There was this idea that she'd been texting, and these messages are from years prior, though, where they're talking about making references to casserole and funeral potatoes, and that was a reference towards killing him, and that they talked about a magician being used. and that's a reference to a hitman. We'll see how all of that plays out. But really, this case comes down to one thing, in my view. The break in this case came when investigators went out to one of the rental homes of Fernandez. They found a matching tire. That happened to be in the possession of this man, Henry Tenon. They go through Tenon's banking records. They find payments that coincide with the times of the murders and receiving these payments from Fernandez. They approach Tenon. Tenon may have done something awful, but Tenon ain't no dummy. And he realizes the only chance he's got in this whole thing is to flip on them. And that's what he's done. You have the trigger man who's willing to testify and say how he was hired and say how they orchestrated this and how he got paid a measly 15 grand or whatever it was to commit this awful, awful murder. Very difficult case to get past that kind of a testimony. So who's up to the job? Well, one of your favorites, Jose Baez, is going to be defending this case for Shanna Gardner. He represented Casey Anthony. He represented Aaron Hernandez. He is kind of seen as a big shot in the criminal defense world, certainly down in Florida. He is, like I said, well-funded by Sterling and Shelley Gardner, who are the co-founders of the highly successful Stamping Up franchise. So there's plenty of money to throw at this. There's a high-priced attorney to throw out this. I imagine this will be a case that we're going to be getting a lot of fireworks and legal proceedings leading up to and during it. It should be a fascinating case to watch. And if you would like to learn a little bit more about it, we have also done a special case notes episode on this case as well. We will give you a link to that in the description. Moving on. Number 9, a Massachusetts man will soon go to trial for the murder of his wife, last seen early on January 1st, 2023, following a New Year's Eve dinner at their Cohasset home. Brian Walsh faces first-degree murder, misleading a police investigation, and other charges in the death of his wife, Anna Walsh, whose body has never been recovered. Prosecutors have said that starting January 1st and for several days after, Brian Walsh made multiple online searches for, quote, dismemberment and best ways to dispose of a body. Incredible. Quote, how long before a body starts to smell, and quote, hacksaw best tool to dismember. Just incredible stuff. Investigators revealed they found on January 3rd surveillance video of a man resembling Walsh throwing what appeared to be heavy trash bags into a dumpster at an apartment complex in Abington, not far from Cohasset. Trial is scheduled to begin on October 21st. This is another one that I'm personally kind of interested in because it's one of those no body cases. I always find these to be fascinating. There's little forensic evidence in this case. It's almost an entirely circumstantial case. A good friend of mine from my time as a prosecutor is a man named John Lewin. You guys may recognize that name. John prosecuted Robert Durst. This was that case that was the subject of the HBO or Netflix series, The Jinx. John is a cold case, no body specialist. Very, very good lawyer, very good prosecutor. And he many times drove home the point that in these cases, oftentimes it's not a who done it. It's a who else could have done it. And it's an interesting way to kind of switch it around in your mind to think about how to prove it to a jury. That really, it's not as much as proving this man did it, but proving that no one else on earth had the means, motive, and opportunity to have done it. And therefore, when you eliminate all other people that could have done it, you're left with the one person who did do it. I always really appreciated that point that he drove home. Very, very smart, very, very accomplished prosecutor who this would be exactly the kind of case he would dig right into. No body case. In fact, it might be too easy for him because he'd only handle it if it were 10 euros past. But a case where, again, it's going to be heavily relying upon motive. Crystal DeSaro says prosecutor Proctor. Oh yeah, we'll get to Proctor. Proctor hasn't been involved, but I don't see him helping out at all. We'll get to Proctor. He had apparently money problems. He was involved in some fine art fraud where he had kind of flim-flam tried to sell some fake Warhols or something like that. There was a suspicion that Anna may have been having an affair, and he became aware of that. But really, much of this case, I think, is going to come down to the steps that he took after her disappearance and the cover-up and the consciousness of guilt. First of all, his phone didn't move during the crucial hours when they were concerned with Anna being dead and what had happened to her. His phone was plugged in. His phone didn't go anywhere, but his child's phone did. And his child's phone traveled all around town while he can be found disposing of different items at different dumpsters throughout the town. His phone can be traced to going to a hardware store to purchase different cleaning supplies. His child's, I'm not quite sure whose iPad, I think, was used. His iPad wasn't used. His computer wasn't used to make Google searches. Again, we have Google searches. Ta-da! But an iPad, his child's iPad, was used to conduct how long before a body starts to smell. 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to. Quote, how long for someone to be missing to inherit? Quote, how to clean blood from a wooded floor. I mean, it's just, again, it blows my mind what people will search for and how specific they will get in these searches. Gina Gilmore says Occam's razor, and you're absolutely right. And then this case does have, because we can't get rid of it and it continues to haunt us, a connection to the Karen Reed matter. Yes, the lead investigator in this case is a name that you will be very familiar with if you've been following Karen Reed, and that is State Trooper Michael Proctor. Already, the defense is making great hay in this, the defense in the Brian Walsh case. They are saying, we want everything to do with Proctor. We want his phone. No shocker there. We want, all communications. We want the disciplinary actions done against him. Will this lead to somehow the dismantling of the Brian Walsh case? I don't think so. Will it lead to the embarrassment of the police department? I think absolutely. Will it lead to more problems for Michael Proctor? I think absolutely. But unless Proctor was also texting a bunch of awful comments about Brian Walsh, I don't think it's going to present problems in this case. And I think a judge is going to see that coming from a mile away and not allow it to present problems in the Brian Walsh case. But I wouldn't be surprised if the prosecution in this case tries to put on this case without ever Michael Proctor getting anywhere near a witness stand, which will be interesting on how you put on a case without the lead investigator ever taking the stand. But they'll find a way to do it, because I can guarantee you they don't want the stink of all that mess to somehow end up in this prosecution. JC Broadway asked, has Proctor been fired yet? I don't think he has. I think there is a hearing actually going to take place this month where he's going in front of a disciplinary board. So yeah, Proctor, he's got problems. Again, you want to hear more about Brian Walsh? I got more Brian Walsh for you. If you haven't heard enough Brian Walsh this evening, have no fear. I've got you covered. We did a deep dive into the Brian Walsh case. A lot of stuff I didn't touch on tonight. Really fascinating stuff about, just good police work. Things that they noticed. One thing that stood out to me is I remember one of the officers went, because she's just a missing person at first. She is last seen at a New Year's Eve party, and it was believed that she went back to DC. She was living in Boston, working in DC. It was believed she went back to DC. And she's reported missing by her work in DC, and then he reports her missing. So now, initially, the investigators are investigating this as a missing person case. And they arrive and they noticed that his vehicle, the back of his vehicle, looked to have been recently cleaned thoroughly. And this made its way into a report. And what I love about that is that it was an observant officer. Who knows if it was Proctor or not, but it was an observant officer who also made sure that that made its way into a report, because those tiny little things, who knows how important those might be later on. And that there is one cut in the 1,000 cuts of circumstantial evidence that will eventually put this man away for his alleged crimes, which they are still alleged. But check out our deep dive on that. We did again, I'm very proud of the research and work that we did on that one. All right, guys, just as my voice is about to have on its final legs, we are on to number 10. 2024 ended with one of the largest manhunts in the nation as police search for the person responsible for the brazen December 4th assassination of the UnitedHealthcare CEO on the streets of Manhattan. 5 days later, Luigi Mangione was arrested while eating breakfast at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, about 233 miles away. Since that time, investigators revealed that Mangione is believed to have been making preparations for the attack for some time, including 3D printing the handgun used in the shooting, which was found on his person, along with a fake ID and a spiral notebook that included several handwritten pages expressing hostility toward the health insurance industry and wealthy executives. Mangione has been charged in New York with first-degree murder, including allegations of terrorism. The federal government has also brought murder charges along with weapons charges, making Mangione eligible for the death penalty. No trial date has yet been set, but prosecutors expect that they will face the New York state charges later this year. One, fascinating case. Everybody was talking about it. Captured the news cycle for many, many days and weeks. It's rare that you see a person with his background, smart kid, good family, just commit such a brazen murder like this. And then it's just kind of gotten bizarre from there, from the way that the prosecutors, the state and the feds, have decided to handle this, because they both brought charges. You don't see this all this often. The feds usually allow local state governments to handle cases like this, like a murder. They only get involved if it involves kind of the crossing of state lines, some sort of larger federal investigation, some sort of RICO situation. But this is a murder that took place on the streets of Manhattan. Any other day of the week, this would be handled on the state level. Now, he did violate federal laws as well, so that it's not illegal that the feds have charged him. It's just bizarre and strange to me and curious to me. In New York, a premeditated murder is second degree. And it's only when certain aggravating factors apply that it makes it first degree. One of those aggravating factors can be if it was in the furtherance of terrorism. New York defines terrorism as a murder done to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or to influence the policy of a unit of government. Can that apply here? I think possibly so. I think there may be some arguments that it's a stretch. But when you look at Mangione's own words, if they're to be believed, he was trying to do something. In other words, he wasn't just trying to kill this CEO. He in fact didn't really care all that much about him. He was just somebody, as Mangione's own words, checked all the right boxes. Because what Mangione was really trying to do, again, according to the allegations, and if this manifesto can be believed, is send a message. He was trying to intimidate or coerce. He was trying to let the population know he meant something by this murder. Rather, in other words, the end result was not just the death of a man. The end result was to send a message. And that's, I think, what makes it into terrorism. Now, again, his attorneys are going to fight this. They're going to say that doesn't apply, because the difference between second degree and first degree is life in prison without parole, or a determinate sentence that would probably get him out after 15, 20 years, which might give us some indication as to why the feds got involved. And I think the feds might feel that when you have a person who's targeting people based upon the industry that they work in, that is something where we need to send a message as the federal government that that will not be tolerated. And in fact, not only will it not be tolerated, but it might subject you to the death penalty. I think they are worried about copycats. I think they are worried about other people deciding to take it upon themselves to not, go after other insurance executives, or, people who are weapons manufacturer executives, or people who are involved in the oil and gas industry executives, or whatever cause that somebody may have that could be sympathized with by a large contingency of the population, that somebody might feel that they're going to take it upon themselves to send a message by killing a CEO. I think the federal government says, we're going to make sure this stops here, and to send the message that you do this, you might be subject to the death penalty. We don't care what your state does federally. We're going to go ahead and bring these types of charges. It's a strong case, I think. The whole case is put together by what was found on him. 3D printed gun, exactly like the gun used. Fake ID, matching the fake ID that was used. This manifesto basically outlining this is what he intended to do. Crystal DeSaro says this kid had everything going for him, and it makes no sense to me. I'm very curious on what is going to come out of trial. Crystal kind of brings me to my last point on this, is that what do you do as the defense in this case? And to Crystal's point, it doesn't make sense. He had everything going for him. So why? And the only thing I would arrive at is that he had some sort of mental break. And if he had a mental break, you would expect this to be a case where mental health plays a large role in the defense's case. Now, the only thing stopping that from happening is the man you're looking at right there. He has to sign off on that defense. And I don't know if this person, who seems very proud of what they've done and seems like they were very intent on sending the message they intended to send, would be willing to hide behind the idea that I'm a crazy person and can't be held responsible for my own actions. I don't know if that's the kind of defense they're going to sign off on. Again, another one of these fascinating cases, another reason why 2025 is going to be a wild, wild year. But that is our 10 cases for 2025. Thank you guys so much for sticking around through that whole thing. Thank you for dealing with my voice giving up on me at times. I'm going to gargle with salt. I'm going to drink tea. I'm going to swig honey, all the things that you guys suggested. I want to hear your voice messages. Don't give up on me. We're going to give this a try. Some quick announcements. Please check out Friday's episode. We talk about Charlie Adelson, the Piketon sentencing, Karen Reed, all the stuff you guys have been following. This Wednesday, we have a special guest for our Wednesday night live. It is Gigi from Pretty Lies and Alibis. She's going to be coming on, and we're going to be talking about, I think, Rex Heuermann and maybe Piketon and all the stuff that she follows so closely. So please check that out. That will be on Wednesday, the 15th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Love to see all of you guys there again. Gigi's fantastic. You're going to love her. If you don't already follow her, you will. Leave us a message, guys. Go to thecourtroomconfidential.com. Check us out so you can hear the messages being played this Sunday, January 19th at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern for our Sunday Fun Day, where we just kind of talk about a lot of this goofiness, but talk about some other kind of crazy stories and pop culture and everything else that we don't usually get to. If you guys aren't already following our social media, please check it out, because we leave a lot of announcements there. So, on Twitter or X, go to Joshua Ritter ESQ or CR Confidential. And on Instagram, we are at Joshua Ritter ESQ or The Courtroom Confidential. You guys are fabulous. Thank you so much for sticking with me tonight. I appreciate you all. I'm going to go drink some tea and sip on some honey and watch some football. So thank you guys again. You're all fabulous. I'll talk to you soon.